hello, everyone. As always, so nice to see you online again. This is the last webinar before summer holidays. So yeah, nice to see you online. And as always, remember to rename yourselves with your name and organization and where you're joining us from. And feel free to turn on your camera now at the beginning to say hello to each other, see each other faces. Yes. So today's topic was also suggested by you through the survey that we shared last year. And you asked us to dedicate some of these knowledge sharing spaces to discuss ill treatment in asylum detention and trauma after release. So this is what we will be discussing today with colleagues from Albania, Pakistan, and the UK. And I know there are some colleagues from Philippines and Spain who will be joining the call, whom I've also asked them to share their experiences after the panel debate. And hopefully we'll get many more colleagues to share their expertise on the topic. So feel free to, as always, go on mic and raise your virtual hand if you want to make an intervention and share your insights. Don't be shy. And just to comment, we will follow this Q&A format, panel Q&A based format, where I will be posing some questions to the panelists. And we will have Q&A spaces after the presentations, after the panelist intervention. So then we will hopefully have some time left to address questions and hear reflections from the audience. So yeah, last but not least, as always, remember that we have simultaneous interpretation available from English to French and Spanish. So make sure to be on the right channel. It's under this interpretation glove icon, which appears on the bottom bar with a glove icon. And yeah, I think we have all the house rules set up. And without any further ado, I will leave the floor to Lisa Henry, IRCT's Secretary General, for some opening remarks. And Lisa, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Berta. And really lovely to see so many of you. IRCT and its membership are really happy to be hosting this. I'm the Secretary General, leader of this organization that spans the globe, and many of you are with us today. So therefore, really nice to put your name and your country you're coming from so we see the volume of the people who are working on this topic. To frame this a bit, we know that the prohibition of torture is a fundamental principle of international law, right? 174 states have ratified the convention, yet we know torture is still going on. And Amnesty International report says it's over 140 countries where torture is still happening, and we do know that torture happens in detention. At the same time, we know that there's the optional protocol and the Convention Against Torture, which requires nations to establish an independent and national preventive mechanism, that there should be access, independent monitoring of these institutions. And we know that many non-governmental organizations, among others, the membership of IRCT, from Dignity to the Association for Prevention of Torture, to Freedom from Torture, and many others, work with different tools and guidelines to prevent torture from happening in detention and pretrial detention. What we know is that it still goes on. Nevertheless, we know that beatings happen in detention. We know that electric torture happens in detention. We know that starvation and dehydration happen in detention. And we know that there is psychological damage caused by isolation. So we, as an organization, International Rehabilitation Council, Torture Rehabilitation, work with healing. We work with the holistic approach to those who come out of detention, both on the prevention side. You heard our colleagues, and we're working very hard on prevention, but when it happens, what do? We have the International Rehabilitation Global Standards. And there are a couple of the paragraphs in there that particularly address this issue. You can, for example, refer to paragraph 5, access to justice. You can refer to paragraph 6 on intake procedures and many more of the global standards on rehabilitation. So I would really recommend that as you continue to improve your work on healing of survivors who've been tortured in detention or pre-trial detention, that you refer to these standards. With no further ado, I'm really pleased that you're here. I hand back over to you, Beata, and the speakers, and we appreciate the speakers who are bringing your lived experience with you on the screen so we can learn from you. And I also encourage you to take what you learn into your organizations and do something with it. This is not just a listening session. We are encouraging people to take this on board, learn from it, and improve your work. So thanks very much for the time, and I wish you a really good webinar.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you so much for linking it to the global standards, which I always tend to forget. So let's remember that. I will also share some links here in the chat. And I think I'm gonna go jump straight into presenting the panelists of today, whom we would like to thank in advance for their time and willingness to participate. So the first panelist will be Dr. Rachel Bingham. She is a clinical advisor at Medical Justice in the UK. The second speaker is Kei Brisku, and he's the executive director at ARCT Albania. The third speaker is Mohammad Ashan Khan, and he's joining us from HDO Pakistan, and he's member of the RCT Survivor Advisory Board and survivor himself. So with that panel, I'm gonna go directly to Dr. Rachel and ask you the first question, Rachel. And the first question is, what forms of ill treatment in asylum detention are most commonly overlooked or normalized?
I decided to approach this question with reference to practices that are deemed to be care for detained people in immigration detention centres. So I'm going to briefly consider security practices and mental health practices, but these do overlap. I'll be glad to hear experiences in other contexts, other countries, but to briefly explain what happens in the UK, detention centres here are built to high security prison specifications. So the experience of being detained is essentially the same as being in prison. The main difference being that the person has not usually committed any crime. And even if they have, they would have completed their sentence. So there's no longer that automatic judicial oversight. And most importantly, there's no longer a set date when they would be released. And in this prison-like setting, there are various processes to manage difficult behaviour. There may be the first response, for example, if somebody is being perceived to be difficult or disruptive, the first step is often to relocate them. So perhaps to move them to a different wing to separate them from others, or to move them to another centre. So that quickly brings me to the first major step, which I think creates the conditions for abuse, because relocation of a person who's been seen to be disruptive is often a planned use of force. So what this means in reality is that guards, perhaps with riot shields or personal protective equipment, will suddenly turn up at the person's location and move them by force to the place they have to go. And what we find at Medical Justice is that this often happens without a meaningful exploration of why the person has acted in the way that they have. So underlying that kind of disruptive behaviour, we find people who are frightened, whose mental health has been very impacted by being detained, who are simply not coping with the fact of imminent removal to their home country or somewhere where they may have experienced ill treatment. And so the first response to that is use of force. And I'm sure we all recognise that when that happens, it of course escalates the situation and greatly increases the risk of harm. So it would be nice to offer a contrast with what happens when people are recognised to be distressed or to have mental health issues or trauma. But unfortunately, we find that in that case, processes are still very focused on management and order in the centre rather than on the person's well-being. So in cases where people are recognised to be distressed or to have mental health problems, we find that there is an immediate focus on risk management and especially emphasis on suicide risk. So if people have harmed themselves or are considered at risk of suicide, they enter a custodial process, which means a plan for how often they need to be observed, how often the reviews will be, and the location they need to be detained at. That there is involvement of healthcare practitioners, but it's led by security staff. So what we see in practice is people placed on constant watch or suicide watch by security guards. There may be repeated checks or checks every 15 minutes. They may be moved to segregation or kept in isolation with the lights constantly on. Often terms like care and separation are used, but the reality is being detained alone. And this is rationalised by the risk to the person's self, but of course, these conditions are extremely harmful. So what we see is that movement to those segregation wings and constant observations can actually exacerbate mental health problems, and we continue this spiral of further distressed episodes and actually an increased risk of experiencing use of force. So at Medical Justice, we do document injuries and harms to mental health in this situation. We've been involved in individual investigations of abuses and at the systemic level. However, over some years of involvement in this type of work, I've come to think that these individual abuses are not the diagnosis, but they are the symptoms of the bigger problem, which is that the system is itself abusive. So I wanted to just finish by reflecting that on a couple of occasions, I've managed to get a lift back to the station by a security guard and heard a little about their lives. And I've been struck by the banal normality of what they used to do before. Pizza delivery guy, teaching assistant, first job after school. And of course, the other side of that is that our clients in detention are also just regular folk without experience or power to navigate this kind of system. So what we're seeing is a group of ordinary people in coercive control of another group of ordinary people in an extremely stressful situation. So I think that the social psychology of how that's likely to go is fairly well understood. But in immigration detention, we have the further layer of complexity and risk added by massive levels of prior trauma. And so added to that, I think these kind of deeply ingrained systemic problems that go with that kind of setup. Complaints are treated as challenges, a culture of disbelief thrives, and as I've described, behaviours that seem to be expressions of distress are redefined as disruptions. So, for example, we see healthcare staff using terms that I don't see in the community to describe people with mental health problems like refractory, non-compliant, or challenging. And we see an absence of screening for trauma-related symptomatology, which I think you would expect from health professionals working with this population in a normal healthcare environment. So I wanted to make that systemic point to address the question of normalisation, because although we are continuing to report our concerns at every level, really, in my experience, the response can be tweaks to policies or service specifications, but this overall structure, it is not made safe. Thank you. Following on really from my previous answer, I think it's clear that anything that harms the person's mental health really increases the risk of escalations and things getting worse. So we have that in mind to be extremely careful in going in and opening up histories of torture and potentially distressing examinations. So I'm going to focus on that theme in answering this, but I'm aware that there's other issues, risks to the detained person, risks to the clinician of reporting. And I expect there's experience in this audience of just that, which I'd welcome thoughts on. But focusing on risks of harm and risks of distress to that individual. So the core thing that we need to do in visiting a person in immigration detention with an undocumented history of torture at medical justice is an Istanbul Protocol guided documentation of their history, thorough examination. But we have the difficulty that we're seeing somebody that we cannot easily follow up. We don't provide ongoing care inside the centres, and we have to be extremely careful of their mental health. Yet without that documentation, they're in immigration detention. So there is a real risk of being removed and perhaps removed to the place where the torture has happened. So how do we address this? So to start with, we find it's really important to emphasise our independence from the detaining authority individually and as an organisation. So depending on the situation, I sometimes explain we don't take any money from the government, or even we campaign against immigration detention. And by the time I see people, they've often had bad experiences of healthcare, actually. So I try to separate myself from that as well. We are there to look for medical evidence, but we're also clinicians. So I find that starting with current well-being and unmet needs is really helpful to show genuine concern and to know where the person is at that time. But we also have to balance that with not over-promising when we have little power, but we can definitely make recommendations, and that can be a really important part. To start the assessment, we have to be very satisfied that we have privacy. So we've all had occasions where security guards have tried to come into our assessments or watch through the door, or we've been given rooms with CCTV. And we try to insist on, appropriate setting for examinations. But I do find we have to continue to argue about this. Negotiating with the officers on duty and at the systemic level. I think that those experiences are part of the person's experience of immigration detention. And I do advise we document them clinically, the impact on the person and on being able to have an assessment. Because, of course, if a person has a history of torture in detention, the impact on them is reflected starkly in limitations on even having a private assessment with a doctor. We also, I'm sure, all talk a lot about re-traumatization in this context. And I've come to understand that relating to processes that are reminiscent or remind the person of powerlessness, experiences of powerlessness. And I think it's really important to keep that in mind, because a person freely telling us traumatic things because they want to, it is not the same as feeling you have to in an interrogative or interview setting. So I think the most important thing our clinicians do is try to provide some control over the over the assessment. So we advocate for questions like, would it be okay to ask you, or how would you feel about talking about this, rather than the more interrogative, what happened next. Of course, that's not enough on its own, and we have to listen carefully, observe very closely, and make a clinical decision to stop if we perceive the person does not want to continue. So in that respect, we're able to differentiate our job as clinicians from others who are more focused on the historical facts of the case only. We have to appreciate the clinical weight of it not being safe to give an account or to talk. So what I mean by that is, if a person is too distressed or too unwell to actually go through in detail what's happened to them, we need to understand that as an important clinical finding in itself. It's actually, I see it as a strength of medical evidence, not a deficiency. So I used to feel quite under pressure to produce a good chronological account if I assessed a survivor of torture. But I've come to see that's so unrealistic in many cases, and not being able to do that is not a limitation of clinical understanding. It's a really important feature of what people have experienced in some cases. So I'd actually encourage clinicians not to necessarily force a chaotic account into a neat order, but rather explain it. Perhaps an introductory paragraph explaining, to set the scene if the person was too unwell or distressed for it to be anything else. And I would apply something similar to a physical examination. Again, I used to feel that the best report was one where every scar had an attribution and a detail in the narrative that matched the examination. But I've come to accept that sometimes, especially in immigration detention, it is not always the place to do that examination. And in that case, the fact of not being able to properly document evidence of past ill treatment is itself a reason why that person should not be detained. So we don't know the future, of course, in such cases, but I think that we shouldn't produce a report that implies the person was well enough for that examination, if what actually needs to happen is they need to be released for an examination or stabilization, and so on. So I think we can only detail what we've tried to do, and the clinical reasons for anything not being completed. So of course, I don't want to be discouraging, and there are many cases where beautifully detailed medical legal report can be produced, and those are very important. But I think the point I wanted to make is that what cannot be done in immigration detention is often solid clinical evidence of the problem of detaining survivors of torture in immigration detention, and that can and should be documented as clinical evidence itself.
From our side, actually, the IRCT has been working for over 3 decades within the torture survivors in the country. But what's becoming increasingly relevant in Albania is the migration and asylum discussions. Following up even into international organizations and the UN committees against torture, so the treatment of migrants and asylum seekers in Albania are in a difficult context in terms of competing objectives. I mean competing objectives because they are different groups of migrants in Albania, so with different kind of support or access in several assessment process. Say that a lot of, but we can come to an end decision is that in Albania the migrants and asylum seekers everyone is coming from a previous experience of war, persecution, torture, or forced displacements. Say that from a preventive perspective on our end, that remind us that the migration management should never be viewed as a competing objectives from our end. I wanna stop somehow in terms of ill treatment in asylum and detention. It mostly focused into the visible forms of abuse, particularly physical violence. While these concerns remains critically important, even rehabilitation practice demonstrates that some of the most damaging consequences arise from practices that gradually become normalized and therefore less visible. From our perspectives as human rights defenders, deprivation of liberty itself creates a difficult situation for the migrants in the country to make them vulnerable in front of different situations. Somehow is it would not be treated as an administrative procedure in Albania, like happens mostly, because so this somehow changed the trajectory of suffering for the individuals. Somehow the migration situation in Albania is mostly as a bridge toward the other EU countries, so the situations are not in the best conditions. Mostly on the visible form of field treatments are generally easier to identify during the assessment process or during our documentations. And in this, I want to stop in terms of overcrowding of the facilities that we have done. We have only 2 facilities in Albania side, and we can clearly see the overcrowding and the poor hygiene and sanitation of the areas. And about the insufficient mental health services, there are not at all medical doctors offering mental health support, or is limited capacities. Another thing, what's happening in the migration situation that is even a concern that we have raised even during the country review, is the communication barriers within the refugees. Somehow interpreters are missing or are in a very low capacity. In another hand, I want to discuss about invisible forms and normalized forms of ill treatment. What we have learned during over time during the documentation and offering services inside the detention centers for migrants is that the prolonged procedures regarding the legal status or humanitarian protection is a concern, and the fear of re-traumatization for them. In terms of screening process, to better understand their backgrounds and to determine somehow the current or future programs or their status, it's on our end an invisible form of ill treatment. Somehow on the invisible forms, I want to mention the lack of meaningful activities inside the detention facilities. Somehow this is as part of future rehabilitation and mental health support, even organizing the meaningful activities in terms of recreation activities or PSS activities inside the detention facilities. It's as Dr. Rachel mentioned before, is the fear of re-traumatization. It happens no matter where the migrants are coming from, but there is always the concern about re-traumatization. So these experiences may gradually become normalized because are perceived as administrative rather than punitive measures. However, then the normalization does not reduce the harmful impact. Uncertainty itself can become traumatic. For the survivors and especially for the foreigners inside the migration facilities, nobody knows what will happen tomorrow in terms of status or recognition of the status. So this is the fear and the denormalization of feeling of powerlessness and the fear of characterizing previous experiences of torture or persecution. That's why we always push in the asylum context of Albania, even for the EU clusters of the accession of Albania, is to offer the Mendes principles and the adoption of the Mendes principles inside the facilities as a bridge between torture prevention and migration governance in the country. Asylum seekers in detention are often interviewed in conditions of acute vulnerability as a normalized situation. So bringing a previous serious trauma in terms of police officer interviewing process and the migrants themselves. So where the interviews are conducted as interrogations in the country, there is a pressure and the fear of intimidation. So we are always pushing the migration facilities, even the relevant ministries, as per EU chapters of Albania obligations, in terms of menace principles, how the authorities should interview persons without coercion and with safeguards, and the Istanbul of Protocol implementation for the documentation and identification of the torture survivors. So perhaps this is one of the most important lessons we have learned through rehabilitation, is that release does not mean a recovery, and does not mean that that everything ended up for the migrants in the country. So physical freedom does not necessarily restore psychological well-being. That's why for us it's very important to offer post-detention psychological support and basing on the mental health support. So what we have learned is that for individuals who previously experienced torture or displaced or war or organized violence, detention may recreate earlier traumatic memories, resulting in cumulative trauma rather than a single isolated experience. So I want to stop somehow, mostly in the social consequences, in terms of social functioning, in terms of social withdrawal or feeling of shame and stigma. The stigma remains high, especially in the context of Albania side, in terms of family tensions and economic support, which become a case of re-traumatization in the country. So that's why the post-assessment is very needed, not only the interrogation process and giving the humanitarian protection status to the migrants. That's why for us it's very important to focus in the Article 14 of the Convention Against Torture, in terms as a right, the rehabilitation and the post-rehabilitation services. So it's not focused only in one stage of detention and the screening process, but it is always into what will happen post-detention, because from my experience, recovery takes time and requires trust from the civil society organization as well, even for us as facilitators, but even from the local government bodies, in terms of offering a strong medical support and medical assistance to the survivors, and psychological support in terms of well-being and reintegration opportunities. Berta, that for me livelihood is very important in terms of torture prevention context, because it is somehow very linked from our side to the rehabilitation side and reintegration process, because it is somehow a community-based support mechanism for rebuild a life. So it is somehow part of the multidisciplinary approach in terms of their rehabilitation and post detention.
Thank you very much, Berta, and hello everybody. I will share just basically our own experience of working in jail-based situation with asylum seekers and refugees, as well as the context of Global South, where a large majority of the asylum seekers and refugees are hosted because of the volatile and conflict-like situation. And then I will share with all of you the real-time examples of Afghan refugees which are being repatriated, forcibly sometimes displaced to their country of origin. So my primary focus would be that real-time experience. But at the same time, I had a chance of going through this system, and I found that there are certain conceptual level and structural level problems that needs to be understood by all of us who are working on that, because uh, there is dire need of research and advocacy work to address these issues, which are I would say, the very long-standing issues, very critical issues in terms of safety and protection of the people on the move. So I prepared this triangle to first make myself understand. I'm not good graphic designer, but I observed that there are three main structural, problems that contribute a kind of a trauma, and I put that trauma inside the triangle, and I called it a cumulative trauma that is emanated from the torture and abuse that happens with the people on the move, and the trauma that comes through detention, and the trauma that comes after the detention in the form of uncertainty. And in this whole triangle, the uncertainty is the most critical aspect, and the most, I would say, the adaptive challenge that needs more research and advocacy work to understand how to minimize this uncertainty, particularly in context of asylum seekers who leave their countries of origin with uncertainties, and who, when resettled, who, when arrive into the country, a host country, they again remain with uncertainty. So this complex web of uncertainty surround them throughout the years. So the cumulative trauma, which I mentioned in the previous triangle, uh, is basically a multi-layer trauma. This is our own experience of HDO working with different, kind of detainees, that uh, we also need to understand the different layers of the trauma to understand the association of these layers. For example, the pre-migration trauma, the asylum seekers, when displaced from their countries of origins, do carry a lot of problems because of the fear, because of the violence and the torture which they face in their own country. And when they arrive into the host country, they confront another form of a trauma. And these preliminary phases of the trauma are never basically assessed or anticipated by our system. I'm not talking about the systems present in the developed world or in the global north, but I'm talking about the countries where a large majority of the displaced population is hosted, and which are located in the global south, and which are the lower and middle income countries. Over there, we don't have this kind of system. And then if they are arrested, they face a torture and abuse, and they face, we call this a custodial trauma. This is the pre-judicial trauma which they face by the time of detention. And this is something which we see here in Pakistan when the Afghan refugees are arrested. Uh, so they face the custodial trauma in the lockup. And then when their judicial happens, they are sent to the detention center or the jail. They face incarceration trauma over there. And afterwards, when their cases are resolved, they face post-detention trauma. And from there, again, when they come out, since they are refugees or asylum seekers, their legal identity and their legal determination and their cases are not addressed. So again, when after passing through these different phases of trauma, they again remain in sheer state of uncertainty, because the this asylum systems all over the world is so chronically delayed, that the time factor itself becomes a very uh, I would say, the kind of a tool to control the liberty of the people. So this is basically the cycle that we feel that the world needs to understand the cumulative trauma and its different layers, where the trauma, where the people experience at different levels. And this problem is because of the two structural problems. The one is it's basically on two competing principles, that we have universal human rights framework, which is meant to basically protect the very rights and well-being of people. At the same time, at state level, we have the state level instruments of security and control management. Now, what happens that in our part of the world, in the global south, countries like Pakistan, the rights are not that much, given much importance, and the state sovereignty, state control, the border management are given the much more importance because of the political affiliation and the political objectives of the states. So what happens that the rights framework is compromised over there. It becomes just a conditional or optional subject over there. And this is the area where most of the asylum seekers and refugees are basically resettled. And over there, the rights framework is not implemented the way it is implemented in the developed nations. Then what happens? That another blind spot is that, because of all these things, it is the mental health of the people that is, affected. And another reason of this very aspect is that in our part of the world, these, the asylum systems do not exist. And most of the time, the asylum procedures are designed by the security experts, the lawyers, the legal experts, not by the psychologists or psychiatrists or the right experts. So the primarily the overall system is tilted towards overall border security or the safety and security of the state, not the mental health and well-being of the people on the move. So what happens that the trauma goes unnoticed, unreported, underreported in these cases, and the focus mostly remains that who is qualified for settlement, who should be given some sort of, refugee status, and these kind of operational things. Generically, the overall the problem of asylum seekers as a right holder is not given much importance. And uh, you will also see these things practically when I will share the examples of refugees with you. This is just a small framework that the protection framework, the first and the foremost thing that we need to understand again, the what is the overall concept of protection, because the protection framework has not been properly explained in any system and procedures anywhere. So it is a very diluted subject. The protection and uncertainty are two main, I would say, the adaptive challenges that needs more research and more study. That what should be the mechanism and what should be the user-friendly mechanism to ensure the protection of the people. So this very framework needs to be seen that it should focus on the safety, legal protection, and rather than detention, some alternative mechanisms of detention should be, because they are the people on the move, sometimes called migrants, sometimes called refugees, sometimes called asylum seekers. But again, having this kind of identity doesn't mean that they are criminals. Okay, so these are on one hand these type of terminologies like asylum seeker, refugees do not serve the purpose, do not serve their identity, not even their gender, not even their age, not even their culture and religion. But we are moving with this system, and as I said, mental health. The Rather than putting these people on the move in detention centers, we should have alternate mechanism, and immediately we should have assessment of their mental health, which is the missing part in our part of the world. And then even after the detention, the social reintegration, and this is the area where HDO is right now working. We have recently signed MOUs with the government institutions for the ex-detainees and the people who come out from the prisons after having imprisonment, that what sort of mechanism should be developed to avoid re-traumatization, avoid recidivism, and such kind of things. Okay, now I come to I relate all these things with the context of Pakistan. And that would be very much distinctive aspect of my presentation, that you will be surprised to know that Pakistan is the host of one of the largest refugees and asylum seekers population in the world, and the longest serving host country in the world. Uh, we have hosted almost 6.5 million refugees since 1980, some 46 years back. And surprisingly, you will be surprised to know that we hosted these refugees having no asylum system at all. We are not even the signatory of International Refugees Law of 1951. We are not having any rehabilitation system, no assessment system at border level. And despite all these things, I don't know. Uh, we hosted 6.5 million people for more than 46 years. Uh, and I think that all this happened because of a interim agreement with the UNHCR, bilateral agreement through which these refugees were hosted. Now, what happened that in the first 4 or 5 years, the UN systems were there to support these refugees, but supporting such a huge population for a longer period of time was a challenge for UN as well. Then what happened that the input support was reduced and ultimately finished. Then what happens that the refugees were forced to come out from the camps and earn their livelihoods in the host community. And that created a conflict in the beginning. We had a lot of fights with the host communities and refugees because they were using the resources of the host community and resources were limited, but they were also in the need. So that created a conflict in the beginning, and again that created a kind of a trauma for refugees because they were considered as the people who were using the resources of the host community. And by that time, arrest, detention, and a lot of torture happened even between two communities, the refugees communities and the host communities. And I can tell you that I was a young child by that time, and I observed these things with my naked eyes, that the people were kicking out and throwing out and beating the refugees because they were using the resources. But that was the only option left with refugees to have those resources like water, like electricity, like food, because for survival they were in need of that. Now, after spending 46 years without any identity, just through an interim agreement with UNHCR, uh, now they are being repatriated into their country, and you can see that how they are being repatriated, and you can see these women and the children. There's a real-time picture. And let me tell you one thing that this generation which is going back was not born in Afghanistan. This is generation which was born in Pakistan. And once they cross the border, they do not know where to go. They do not know the ABCD of Afghanistan. They only know the language, and rest of the things they do not know. Because in 1980, uh, their parents who basically migrated, majority of them has either become died or become so old not to deal with these things. So this is basically the second generation that is being repatriated after 50 years. And these are mostly the women's and children's which are being repatriated. These are the camps in my area, which I took the photos. They were living over there again, the women's and children. And this is again, you can see the women sitting outside the registration office and the facilities because we don't have any kind of asylum system. So from all the three pictures, you can easily go through and you see that the males are not there, only the females and children. So females and children are the worst victims. And in this context of Pakistan, the males are not living right now because of the reason that there is no livelihood, income, and employment opportunities in Afghanistan. So what they did that they have decided to send their families, the women's and children's, to Afghanistan, and they are in the hiding that they will earn the livelihood in Pakistan and they will send it back to Afghanistan without knowing that once the government has decided, then nobody will be prepared to do any kind of thing. But they are not that much educated, so they are of the mind that since there is no livelihood opportunity in Afghanistan, so how our families will survive? Again, there is an issue, and these are those issues which are the post-migration issues, which are beyond the detention issues that needs to be seen by all the policies and decision makers. So I think my time is over, and I hand it over here with this statement that most of the time we think that the issues of people on the move are single event, but they are not basically the single event. It's the continuous process, as we have seen the 46-year miseries of the refugees and asylum seekers in Pakistan, in Iran and Iraq, and they fled from their country. They were persecuted by the forces in their own country. They came over here. They were resettled, got into interim arrangement, and afterward there was no plan of action to for their development, for their livelihoods, for their health. So they were left at the mercy of none, and they were already living in the developing and underdeveloped countries, which were already poverty stricken. So placing these people in such a kind of country is a system failure and structural problem that needs to be seen, and that basically trauma and re-traumatization process never ended. They are the people who spent 46 years over here, and again they were made zero. Again they have to start their life from zero, not even zero, from minus. So these are the things that needs to be seen. Okay, thank you. I stop here.
So now we officially open the Q&A space. I can already start with a couple that I can see from the chat. Among them, from Sara Lopez, I think you have two questions, Sara, one for Rachel, and the other one now for Mohammed. So maybe we can start with you, Sara, and then I will move on to Mechild.
Yes, thank you. Amazing presentations. I'm originally from Mexico, and I'm living in Canada as a protected person. And I also faced detention in Canada. So this is my expertise, and I would like to check a couple of things with Rachel. The first one is, do you conduct a post-interview assessment? Because after disclosing these traumatic events that are happening in detention or incarceration, any individual can be reactivated or re-traumatized. So what is your experience about this?
Hi, Sarah. Thank you very much for the question, and actually for giving me the opportunity to say a bit more. I was quite focused on that visit to the person in detention, but we are providing a much more holistic kind of wraparound service. So we have a casework team who will try to form a relationship and support the person before they arrange a clinician to see them. And that's a really important part of helping them to know what's going to happen and to feel some trust in our service. They will then follow the person up. So, having medical evidence is one thing, but without legal representation and good advice, it's not anything. So we try to, our team try to make sure that people have access to that as well, to use the evidence, and can also, follow up their well-being, ensure that they're asked how did it go and if they need anything afterwards, and so on. I think, and then of course, if person is released on the basis of medical evidence, they could be released to street homelessness, so that the needs do not stop there, as Kei described as well. So I think this kind of visit and potentially re-traumatizing assessment, as you very kindly point out, it needs to be part of that kind of supportive package. So yeah, thank you for the opportunity to clarify that, Sarah.
Thank you. And the second question is for any of the speakers, if about the advocacy work that you have been doing in order to get better conditions for those that are facing immigration detention. How do you advocate? And do you have any positive outcomes from your advocacy?
Should I take this one as well, Berta? Thank you. Thank you. Another great question, Sarah. Thank you. So in our organisation, we have actually a team also doing advocacy, and they use the medical evidence that our clinicians collect to evidence what's happening in immigration detention. And then they can use that through litigation, through parliamentary work, through media occasionally, to use all of the channels open for advocacy, really. But it is separate from the collection of clinical and medical evidence of what's happening in detention, and for a sensible reason, really, that evidence is not advocacy. It's just the facts of what our clinicians have observed and seen in detention and documented according to standards like the Istanbul Protocol and various other guidance. So that kind of gives us a solid evidence-based foundation to talk about what we're seeing and what's happening in detention, and that kind of feeds into other advocacy work. Have we had successes? You know, it's a difficult time, isn't it? I'm sure we're all feeling we've had some successes, we've had public exposures, we've had individuals win compensation, of course, we've fed into various pieces of guidance and policy, and that's important, but overall, are things getting better? Too early to say. Thank you for the question.
Thanks, Rachel. And I don't know if Kei or Mohammed, you want to share your experience with advocacy work and the outcomes of it.
I can share the challenges of advocacy work here in our part of the region. That, you know, the advocacy for the protection and well-being of people on the move, be they the migrants, the refugees, or asylum seekers, is quite difficult in our part of the world, because, and it's not even sometimes allowed to do so, particularly when the people are displaced from the neighboring countries, and if both the neighboring countries are having some sort of hostile relationship, some sort of cross-border tensions, as it is happening in context of Pakistan. So in that case, advocacy is not only difficult, but has direct bearings on the the legal status, the identifications, the placement and resettlement of affected people as well, because the organizations are not allowed to raise these issues on one hand. At the same time, though the displaced population, the refugees populations who cross the borders, are not given space now because of the number of reasons. One reason is that the countries are having some sort of tense relations, like as it is happening in our case with Afghanistan, because there is a Taliban regime over there, and they are having some sort of now very different mindset towards Pakistan. So we are having a very tense relationship with them. So as a result of that, it is the affectees population that is being affected, and those who are working for the rights of them are also faced with those problems. So without having a good relationship between the countries, advocacy work for the cause of affected people is a challenge in those areas where there are some sort of cross-border tension or some sort of conflict, on any ground between the states. Yes.
Thanks, Mohammed. And I think Kei also wants to briefly share.
Yeah, quick intervention on my end. Thank you very much, Sarah, for the question. From our end, the advocacy is a very powerful tool, especially in a country, in Albania side. If without advocacy, it will take a lifetime to see a change and to see an impactful thing inside the detention centers. So for us, it's very important. So on our end, it means investing in the experiences that we gain during the assessment process, but even in terms of what we see as practitioner and in long-term consequences In a national level, we try to advocate within the local government, including even state institutions and independent bodies or professional actors, in order to strengthen safeguards and promote trauma-informed practices inside the detention centers. In an international level, for us, especially in the context of Albania, for the moment, is very important to advocate in an international level, such as UN bodies, CPT, or other independent mechanism. And what we can see during the advocacy is that, for example, for the moment, it's a very powerful tool. For example, now, after a lot of consortium of organizations for the detention and asylum and migrant processes, we can see that now the state is distributing the human right cards inside the detention facilities as per CPT regulations. And another thing is about improved safeguards and independent monitoration inside the detention facilities. For around 20 years in Albania, it wasn't possible to do independent monitoration into the detention facilities for migrants and asylum seekers due to the high security and national security concerns. And now is it possible? So, but of course, work need to be done, and from my perspective, advocacy need to go on the same line within the rehabilitation services, especially when it comes to a sensitive topic like migrants and asylum seekers.
Thank you so much, Kei, and Mohammad and Rachel for sharing your experience with advocacy and the importance of it. I'm gonna go to the next digital hand up from Hadi, who I believe is joining us from Greece. Kalimera, Hadi. And then after Hadi, I will encourage William to pose his question that I can see in the tab for Mohammad to pose it on the mic, if possible. But go ahead, Hadi.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much first for the wonderful presentation, very rich. My question is going to be a little bit long between sharing experience and a question at the same time, and might be directed to Dr. Rachel. We working in Greece. I am part of a team, in a bigger part of a team, working on advocacy related to detention of asylum seekers in the Balkan region in general. And we always look for this method of collecting testimonies in less extractive way, and without trying to provoke traumas or re-provoke the traumas. And we always think of the idea of recollecting them in a way in the final destination, for example, or the people when they out of detention, not only inside the detention. So if you have any advice how we could do a type of collecting testimonies to be used in advocacy work with the less possible to provoke traumas. This is my first question, and the second question are the results or the documentation of the legal the clinic that you do in medical justice are public to be used from other actors in order, because in my opinion, personally, violation of human rights should not be expired after years. Testimonies collected from 20 years ago still be a good effective element to be used in advocacy, and maybe less traumatizing after time passing on it. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Harry. So yeah, go ahead, Rachel. So the first question I think applies to all of you, and the second for you, Rachel.
Thank you. Thanks, Hadi, for the question. So the first part was how to collect testimonies not to provoke trauma. You know, as I said in my longer response, this is a very difficult issue. I think it's about at the core, it's about a balance of risks between the risks and benefits to that person, and really about the choice and the discussion with the person about what they feel able to share, what they want to share, and just doing it in a safer way as possible. I think what I really wanted to emphasize earlier is to consider those limitations on what you can do to be a really important part of the picture of what that person's going through. and just focus on that person being in control. It's their choice, with support, to avoid pressure and to be the opposite of those immigration interviews and interrogations that we've heard about. The second part was what public work we have, and the chance for me to plug our website. So thank you for that. We do report annually and on various events, which includes lots of testimony from people with lived experience of detention, as well as gathering the data found by our clinicians and the evidence in those reports. So yeah, please do take a look there. And if I can share any more on that, please do get in touch. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. I'm sharing the website of medical justice here in the chat. And I don't know if Mohammad and Kei have anything to add, maybe to the first question. Otherwise, we move to William from IMLU. I'll encourage William. He's written a question in the chat for Mohammad, but I would like to encourage you to ask it, go on mic and ask it yourself, William, if that's at all possible. Otherwise, I can read it. There you go.
Okay, thank you, Bata. I just wanted to know, because you see here in Kenya, the government has currently been working with the UNHCR and civil society organizations to integrate the refugee population with the general population so that they can generate their own income. So I just wanted to know whether Pakistan also has such a program. And then if that is the case, then what has been the reaction of the citizens to the integration program? Thank you.
Yeah, William, basically right now there is no program for the reintegration. There is only one program going on, and that is the repatriation program. Whether someone agrees or not, the refugees were given 5-6 deadlines, and afterwards, since they were living here the last 40-50 years, so practically it was not possible for them to even think that they will be displaced one day after 50 years of living over here. They were treating themselves as a Pakistani population because they were born over here. So it was beyond their imagination to think that one day they will be displaced because, so right now there is no integration. They are being forcibly or sometimes, displaced. And those who have crossed the deadline period now, what is happening that the security forces just pick them, put them in the jail, and then directly send them to the border, and over there they are sent to the other part of the border. So what happens that they get disconnected with their families, particularly women and children, because women and children are not picked in that way. So again, it is another form of a trauma which people are facing. And those who are sent back over there, neither we had any integration program over here, nor we have any kind of integration program over there in Afghanistan, because I live in near to the refugees camps area, and we have a lot of friends, Afghani friends, who have been repatriated to Afghanistan, and they are in contact with us, and they told us that they are not happy in Afghanistan because they don't know the culture, they only know the language, they don't know the systems, they don't know the geography, they are not well aware. So, in other words, you could say that they are the modern generation being forcibly fitted into an old generation, because in Afghanistan there is a traditional system that is backed by Taliban. So the culture and the system is very much different than the culture and system in Pakistan. So they have been grown up in Pakistan, and when they went back, they are unable to adjust over there. And this is that area which needs further research, further exploration, the post-migration trauma, the long-term psychological impacts of, beyond detention and uh, post-migration. We don't have knowledge of these things here, but these things are happening. Every second friend is calling us and telling us, we are missing Pakistan, we are not fit over here. There is no employment, no livelihood, no security, no system over here. So we are feeling misfit over there. So rather than talking about integrations, there is not even the basic minimum requirements being meted out either here or in Afghanistan. Yes.
Thank you, Mohammed. I hope, William, your question was addressed, and I can see your colleague from HDO also has something to add. Muhammad, if you want to go ahead, or maybe that's a question.
Thank you so much, Berta. My colleague has very nicely presented the situation our Afghan brothers are going through in Pakistan during their repatriation or expulsion from Pakistan. There are two type of. I just want to share that there are two type of policies that are right now going on in Pakistan. Since the central government is being led by another party, that is Pakistan Muslim League Nawaz, but in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, there is another party, that is the PTI. They both have different policies for Afghan refugees. The central government has adopted a policy, illegal foreigners repatriation plan 2026, and under that plan they are many a time asked to leave voluntarily, or being forced to get out of the Pakistan. But in the KP province, the government has very soft corner for them, and they are still advocating for with the central government that they should not be forced to leave. They should since the situation is very volatile in Afghanistan, their dagger-drawn situation within the country as well as with Pakistan. So the PTI government in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa has very soft corner for them, and the government has set holding centers at the border in the border areas alongside the UNHCR. They are also having voluntary repatriation centers where they are being provided medical and at a small level psychological rehabilitation services to the repatriating families. As far as the HDO's policy towards the Afghan refugees or asylum seekers is concerned, since Pakistan has is not signatory to the Refugees Conventions of 1951, and later the protocols adopted by other countries. So we are right now dealing these Afghans under the Foreigners Act 1946. So they are the easy target. They are put in jail for having no documents, or sometimes they are having documents, and despite all these documentation, they are put in jails and they are subjected to torture. Since we are working in different prisons of the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, we equally treat them with other torture victims. We have our clinicians register them for psychological rehabilitation. Most of the mental problems they carry, depression, anxiety, and the PTSD. So our clinicians provide them the psychological support, the medical assistance. We engage them in the beatcraft for their livelihood security during the post-detention life. So these are being treated equally with the Pakistani torture victims. So this is what I wanted to share. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Muhammad. And think we're hearing a lot the need for livelihoods after post-detention, So I believe my colleague Henok is online. So after these questions, I don't see any other hand up, but I would like to encourage Mechthild, if she's still with us, because Mechthild has been sharing a couple of interesting inputs here in the chat. I'm not aware if everyone can see the chat. I don't know if Mechthild, do you want to give some light to these resources that you shared?
Yes, thank
or
you.
your experience. Yeah.
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay, fine. All right. I just wanted to mention that in the Center Überleben in Berlin, we have done some studies on the question of re-traumatization. And because the question was before, do we really risk a lot re-traumatization? And what was mentioned already by you was that it depends so much on how you do your assessment, how you do the interview. If you do enough psychoeducation, that reactualization of traumatic memories is just normal after disclosure of things you have tried to avoid before. But we very rarely found really re-traumatization that is with very strong symptomatology just after for some days, or with a re-traumatization in the sense of getting a higher level of symptoms and being more chronically and more complex traumatized through these interviews. But it really depends on how it is done. And I think we have to lose a little bit our fear. Because the importance is that you have a trustful relation, that you ask direct questions, and that's okay. If you ask before, is it okay that we talk about this? And there was also one study I didn't mention. This is an old one that was done in criminal court, also on re-traumatization by Merker and alias. I think it was 2002 or something like this, or 2006. And the re-traumatization occurred more depending on the outcome. Yeah, that if then the decision is negative and there is insecurity again, this is what you have shown, Mohammed, as this circle which is going on. And I think this is something with all advocacy in the current situation, also in Europe, it is becoming worse. And so we have to get together and fight for this, because security and integration is what you need after torture. And if not, it's like the picture you have showed from the people repatriated to Afghanistan now. So I wish all of us, all of you, that we stand together and strengthen each other in this work.